God's judgment and mercy, the decision to send the flood. Divine holiness, confronting human corruption. The biblical account of the flood, recorded primarily in Genesis 6:9, stands as one of the most profound narratives in Scripture, revealing the tension and harmony between God's judgment and God's mercy. Far from being a mere story of destruction, the flood represents a decisive moment in the divine-human relationship, where moral corruption reaches its peak and divine holiness responds, with both justice and compassion. The decision to send the flood was not impulsive nor arbitrary. It emerged from God's intimate awareness of human wickedness and his unwavering commitment to righteousness, while simultaneously preserving hope for humanity's future. This essay explores how God's judgment and mercy are inseparably woven into the decision to send the flood. By examining the moral state of the world, God's emotional response, the theological necessity of judgment, and the subtle yet powerful presence of mercy within divine wrath, we gain a deeper understanding of the flood, not merely as punishment, but as moral reset, redemptive judgment, and covenantal preparation. The moral collapse of humanity, Genesis 6:5, offers a devastating assessment of humanity's condition. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This verse presents one of the most severe moral evaluations in the Bible. Human corruption is described as total, every intention, internal of the heart, and continuous, only evil continually. Sin was no longer occasional or restrained. It had become systemic and normalized. Violence, injustice, pride, and moral rebellion dominated human society. The flood narrative teaches that God's judgment is not triggered by isolated sins, but by persistent, unrepentant moral decay. Humanity had rejected its role as God's image bearer, choosing self-rule over divine order. The world created as very good, Genesis 1:31, had been transformed into a place where evil shaped every human desire. This condition threatened not only human society, but the integrity of creation itself. Sin distorted relationships between humans, between humanity and nature, and between humanity and God. The flood thus becomes a response not merely to disobedience, but to cosmic disorder. Divine awareness and moral accountability. A crucial element of the flood story is that God sees. Scripture emphasizes divine awareness. The Lord saw. This seeing is not passive observation. It is moral evaluation. God is portrayed as a righteous judge who carefully assesses the condition of his creation. Biblical theology consistently affirms that God's judgment is grounded in truth and justice. He does not act out of ignorance or emotional volatility. The decision to send the flood reflects God's commitment to moral accountability. World without consequences for evil would contradict God's holiness and undermine moral order. Importantly, divine judgment in the flood narrative is relational, not mechanical. God is not a distant force enforcing rules. He is a personal being responding to a broken relationship. Human sin grieves God because it violates love, trust, and covenant responsibility. The grief of God, judgment born from sorrow. One of the most striking aspects of the flood narrative is the emotional language used to describe God's response. The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Genesis 6:6. This verse reveals a God who is deeply affected by human actions. Divine grief challenges simplistic views of God as unemotional or detached. The decision to send the flood arises from sorrow, not cruelty. God's regret does not imply error in creation, but anguish over humanity's moral collapse. God's grief underscores that judgment is never God's preferred action. Scripture repeatedly affirms that God takes no pleasure in destruction, Ezekiel 18:23. The flood is therefore a tragic necessity, not an act of divine satisfaction. It reveals the painful cost of human rebellion and the seriousness with which God regards moral responsibility. Judgment as a moral necessity If God had ignored humanity's corruption, divine holiness would be compromised. Judgment in the flood narrative is presented as a moral necessity to prevent evil from becoming eternally entrenched. Allowing unchecked violence and wickedness to continue would result in the permanent corruption of creation. The flood functions as a moral boundary, declaring that evil has limits. God's judgment affirms that injustice matters, that violence is unacceptable, and that human actions carry consequences. In this sense, the flood protects future generations by interrupting a self-destructive trajectory. Theologically, judgment is an expression of God's righteousness. Justice is not opposed to love. Rather, it preserves love by confronting what destroys. Yet the flood demonstrates that divine love does not tolerate perpetual harm. The hidden presence of mercy, even in Genesis 6, before the flood begins, mercy quietly emerges. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, Genesis 6:8. While judgment dominates the world, mercy selects a remnant. God's decision to send the flood is simultaneously a decision to save, preserve, and renew. Mercy is not an afterthought. It is embedded in the judgment itself. Noah's favor does not negate judgment. It reveals its purpose. The flood is not meant to end humanity, but to purify and preserve. Yet God's mercy ensures continuity, hope, and the possibility of a restored relationship between Creator and creation. The decision to send the flood emerges from the intersection of divine holiness, human corruption, and divine grief. God's judgment is shown to be morally justified, emotionally painful, and theologically necessary. Yet even at this early stage, mercy quietly shapes the narrative, preparing the way for salvation, covenant, and renewal. Destruction as the reversal of creation. The flood narrative intentionally echoes the language of Genesis. Where God once brought order, the flood brings dissolution. Land disappears beneath water, life is extinguished, and boundaries established at creation collapse. This reversal underscores the seriousness of human sin. Corruption has reached such a depth that creation itself must be undone. Genesis 7:21-23 describes the extent of destruction. All flesh died that moved on the earth. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. The repetition of all emphasizes the completeness of judgment. No corner of the corrupted world escapes. This total destruction serves a theological purpose. It reveals that sin, when fully matured, results in death. The flood becomes a visible embodiment of the moral truth that separation from God leads to destruction. Yet this devastation is not random violence. Divine judgment is precise in purpose and scope. God's power does not act impulsively. It executes justice in response to sustained rebellion. The ark amid the waters, power restrained by mercy. While destruction engulfs the earth, the ark remains afloat, an unmistakable sign that divine power includes both judgment and preservation. The same waters that destroy the wicked uphold the righteous remnant. This dual function of the floodwaters reveals the selective nature of divine power. Genesis 7:16 states, "And the Lord shut him in." This simple phrase carries immense theological weight. God personally seals the ark, symbolizing divine protection. Noah's survival is not the result of engineering skill alone, but of divine intervention. The ark becomes a floating sanctuary, upheld by the very forces destroying the world outside. Divine power is thus shown to be purposeful and moral. God does not destroy indiscriminately. He distinguishes between corruption and obedience. The ark stands as evidence that even in moments of overwhelming judgment, God's power is guided by mercy, the psychological and cosmic weight of destruction. The flood's destruction is not only physical but existential. It marks the end of an entire world. Cultures, memories, relationships, and histories vanish beneath the waters. Noah and his family bear the psychological weight of being the sole survivors of humanity. This aspect of the narrative reminds readers that divine judgment carries emotional and relational consequences. The silence that follows the destruction is profound. After the rains cease, the world exists in a state of suspended life, awaiting renewal. This pause reflects the gravity of divine judgment. God does not rush renewal. He allows the consequences of sin to be fully realized. Divine power over time and nature. The flood narrative emphasizes God's control not only over natural forces, but also over time. The rains last 40 days, the waters prevail for 150 days, and the process of recession unfolds gradually. This structured timeline shows that divine power is deliberate, measured, and purposeful. God's sovereignty over time reinforces the theological message. Judgment and renewal occur according to divine will, not human urgency. The slow retreat of the waters teaches patience, dependence, and trust in God's timing. The destruction phase of the biblical flood reveals divine power in its most fearsome form, commanding the forces of nature, reversing creation, and executing judgment with absolute authority. Yet even amid devastation, God's power is restrained by purpose and mercy. The ark stands as a symbol that destruction is not the final word. After the flood, the rainbow and the birth of a new humanity, from judgment to covenant, humanity steps into a renewed world. The conclusion of the biblical flood does not end with receding waters, but with a new beginning for humanity. Genesis 8:9 presents one of the most hopeful and theologically rich moments in Scripture. The transition from global judgment to divine covenant. The appearance of the rainbow marks a turning point in God's relationship with humanity, symbolizing mercy after wrath, order after chaos, and promise after destruction. This essay explores how life after the flood represents the rebirth of humanity, the renewal of creation, and the establishment of a covenant that reshapes the future of the world. The rainbow is not merely a natural phenomenon. It is a sacred sign that redefines divine judgment and human responsibility. Through Noah and his descendants, God initiates a new chapter in human history, one marked by grace, moral accountability, and enduring hope. Stepping into a cleansed world, Genesis 8:15-19 records God's command for Noah and his family to leave the ark. This moment is more than physical relocation. It represents humanity stepping into a cleansed but fragile world. The earth has been washed of corruption, yet the potential for sin remains. The survivors emerge not into paradise, but into responsibility. The first human footsteps on post-flood ground mirror Adam's first steps in Eden. Once again, humanity is entrusted with stewardship over creation. The silence of the new world emphasizes both opportunity and vulnerability. Life must be rebuilt from nothing. Cultures reformed and moral order re-established. This moment teaches that divine judgment clears space for renewal. But renewal requires human participation. God restores the world, but humanity must choose obedience within it. Noah's altar, worship before possession. Noah's first recorded act after leaving the ark is worship. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings. Genesis 8:3. This act establishes a foundational principle of the new humanity. Worship precedes ownership. Before building homes, planting crops, or establishing societies, Noah acknowledges God's sovereignty. Worship becomes the bridge between survival and renewal. The sacrifice is costly. In a world with limited life, Noah offers some of the very animals essential for survival. This demonstrates trust in God's provision and gratitude for divine mercy. It also reinforces that the new humanity is meant to live in reverence, not self-sufficiency. God's response to this worship is pivotal. Scripture states that the Lord was pleased and makes a profound promise regarding the future of the earth. God's inner resolve, mercy anchored in realism. Genesis 8:21 reveals a striking divine declaration. Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. This statement is extraordinary because God acknowledges that human nature has not fundamentally changed. Sin still exists. The flood did not perfect humanity, it restrained evil and reset history. God's mercy after the flood is therefore not based on human righteousness, but on divine grace. This marks a shift in how God engages with humanity. Rather than responding to sin with total destruction, God commits to sustaining the world despite human weakness. The new humanity exists under mercy, tempered by moral realism. The promise that seasons will continue seed time and harvest. Cold and heat establishes stability as a divine gift. The regular rhythms of nature become signs of God's enduring patience. The reaffirmation of the creation mandate. In Genesis 9:1, God blesses Noah and his sons, repeating the command given to Adam, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." This repetition confirms that Noah represents a new Adam, and his family embodies a new beginning for humanity. The command affirms life, growth, and expansion. Humanity is once again invited to populate the earth and shape its future. However, the post-flood mandate carries a deeper awareness of human brokenness. Authority over animals is now marked by fear and distance, reflecting a changed relationship between humans and creation. The harmony of Eden is replaced by a more cautious coexistence. This realism reinforces the lesson of the flood. Humanity remains powerful but flawed, capable of stewardship or destruction, depending on moral choices. The sanctity of life and moral order. A defining feature of the new humanity is the explicit establishment of the sanctity of human life. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. The biblical flood is a timeless theological narrative that reveals God's holiness, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. It teaches that sin has consequences, obedience matters, and life is sacred. Yet above all, it proclaims hope that even in judgment, God's ultimate purpose is renewal and grace. The flood challenges every generation to live responsibly, faithfully and humbly before God, remembering that the same God who judges the world also preserves it and offers a future filled with promise.